Salam, everyone. Welcome to the Samawar Network. We're excited to have you all here today. We've got three of us here, three different time zones. We're all going to be sharing some stories today and hearing a little bit more about what's happening in Afghanistan right now. So that's going to be the focus of today's conversation. So we've entitled this call Motherland Reports. We have the parliamentary elections and lots of other things happening in Afghanistan, and we thought it was a really good opportunity for us to get together and hear about what's going on, hearing from somebody who's down there on the ground. For those of you that are new, the Samawar Network is where the Afghan diaspora comes for online discussions. So we're a group of people who come together and talk about issues facing our community. Whether that be on iTunes, you can catch us on iTunes podcast, Instagram, Facebook. So we're trying out our Facebook Live. So if there's any technical difficulties, please bear with us and be patient. So I will briefly introduce myself. My name is Omar. I'm calling in from Washington D.C. right now. Medina, you want to introduce yourself, and then Ali, you can introduce yourself.
All right, cool. Hi guys, my name is Medina Wadak. I'm calling from Los Angeles, California right now. Ali John?
Yes. I'm Ali Latifi. I'm a journalist, and I'm calling in from Kabul.
Awesome. Okay, so Ali John, I was really curious before the call about how you ended up in Afghanistan, because I know that you weren't always there. So, do you mind giving us like a little synopsis about how you ended up there and kind of your work there?
So basically, we left when I was 3 or 4 years old, and then I basically grew up my entire life in California. And then in 2011, I moved to Doha to work for Al Jazeera, and basically due to visa issues, I got a chance to come to Kabul for the first time. And I lied to my parents, said I was coming to Beirut. I came here alone, didn't tell any of my family in Kabul, basically had my friends show me around, and then I was saying earlier, I think what affected me the most and what stayed with me is growing up, we always heard about a place where everyone looks like us and talks like us, and it seemed almost magical, like something that wouldn't exist. So being here, I think that's what sort of kept me here. And then in 2013, I left Al Jazeera for a little bit, and I moved to Kabul. Then I went back to Al Jazeera in Kabul. Then I was working with the LA Times for a while, and now I'm working freelance. So I've been here pretty much since 2013.
That's awesome. I definitely connect with you when you talk about kind of the romantic idea of Afghanistan. And when I visited in March, I definitely felt that too. And it was such a trip seeing everyone who looks like me, and it definitely felt like this missing piece. So that's awesome that you ended up there and you're working there now. As diaspora Afghans, I feel like it's very difficult for us to connect with Afghanistan, and so like kind of in that pursuit, I know for me specifically, talking from my personal experience, I always like to just kind of be informed about what's going on. So we know right now the elections are going on. So pretty much, why do you think that we should care about the elections? Why should we care about what's going on in Afghanistan?
I can give you the sarcastic answer, but I'll give you the serious answer.
Yeah, we want to hear both.
Yeah, start with the real sarcastic one, because we know that's the real one.
Sarcastic answer. The sarcastic answer is because you're Afghan and you should care about what happens in Afghanistan. But the serious answer is that, I think one of the sort of, when the U.S. started their invasion in 2001, one of the things that they said they would do is, quote unquote, bring democracy here. So it's important to see what something like that means. Is it possible to bring democracy somewhere and to expect it to grow because it took the U.S. democracy 200 something years to reach to the point where they could elect a reality show host as their president, right? Right. And so we're facing all sorts of issues right now. but it is still a growing democracy, and people are, for instance, so with this election, the Taliban from the beginning vowed that they would try and thwart this election at any cost, right? So they attacked election campaigns, they attacked election centers, and then in these last 2 days of voting, they've been staging attacks and launching rockets and things like that. But despite all of that, just now the election commission said that 4 million people voted.
Wow.
That's a big deal, because basically the eligible voter rate is about 8 million. So the fact that half of them vote, that's essentially in line with U.S. presidential elections. The fact that half of the eligible people, despite all of these issues, voted, it's something to take into consideration. And it's just important to know, I think, because people always talk about democracy and what it takes to bring, quote unquote, bring it somewhere. We're learning the process. And like I said, like the U.S. democracy, the French democracy, look at what happened in Britain with Brexit. All of these things show the complications of democracy, and yet somehow we're the poster child for a bad democracy.
Gotcha.
Ali, I see you have the blue mark on your finger. I didn't catch that. So what was the process like for you voting?
Sure. So for me, it was actually, I'll expand on it in a minute. For me, it was actually really simple. I went to the place where I registered. So it was a masjid. They call it the Hiroti Masjid. I went there, and basically they changed the rules for voting, where now where you register to vote is where you have to vote, which I think it's similar to that in the U.S., no? Like where you vote is based on where you live, right? So when I went into the center, this was the first time that they included like biometric verification, and essentially what that looked like was basically like those credit card scanners that they bring at the table to you to swipe.
Yeah.
It looked like that. No, it literally looked like that with a phone attached to it. And so what happens is you walk in, you go to one of the tables, and they find your name on the form. Then you go to the next table, and that's where the biometric thing is. So it looks like this iPhone, right? Okay. So they give you the biometric device. You put one fingerprint, then you put another. Then they turn it around, take your picture. And then they take a picture of your national ID with the voter sticker. And then the last thing you do is you dip your finger in the ink, and then you go and you vote. So for me, it was really easy. It went very quickly. But the reason that there was still voting today on Sunday is because for a lot of people, it wasn't this simple. For a lot of people who went, either in some cases the voting center was entirely closed. There weren't ballot papers, there weren't ballot boxes, elections commission staff didn't show up, any number of really egregious logistical mistakes, logistical problems took place. And so because of that, today, on Sunday, they've never had a 2-day election ever. So today, on Sunday, more than 250 centers were reopened across 22 provinces, including Kabul, so that people could vote. So that's how we got to the number of 4 million in the last 2 days.
Okay. I think that's awesome that they're accommodating that, and they're recognizing that, and kind of ensuring that people are able to come out and vote. So we wanted to ask, in terms of how regionally. Than others.
Did she cut out for you?
Yeah.
Okay. Medina, you cut out for a second, so you want to ask your question again?
Okay. Yeah. So atmosphere, what is that atmosphere like right now? And then also regionally, can you kind of describe if that does differ regionally?
So the atmosphere, for instance, yesterday the atmosphere was very calm. There weren't a lot of people on the streets because they were worried about the security situation. I was told by my relatives here, don't step out of the house. Obviously, I disobeyed them. A lot of other people were told the same thing, and a lot of people did try and keep up with the streets because of that. And yet, still, despite that, a lot of people did come out and vote, and we have to recognize that. Today, things started to go back to normal a little bit, even though today was a holiday too. That's the other thing that separates the elections here from, say, the elections in the U.S. is that voting day is always a holiday, so that everyone has a chance to vote. It's always a day off. So that means this week there were 2 days off for the election. As far as like regionally, the biggest issue regionally is that, for instance, in Kandahar in the south, their election was delayed by a week because their police chief was killed in a Taliban attack 48 hours before the elections occurred. And then in the east, in Ghazni, their elections have been delayed probably till the presidential election in April, but that's not certain either because of security and logistical issues. And then as far as like violence and attacks, like in the north in Kunduz, that there was a lot of attacks there. The main roads were shut down by the Taliban. There were a lot of rocket attacks. A lot of people didn't feel they could vote because of security problems. So that's sort of like regionally what's been going on.
Okay.
So would you say it's safe to vote in Afghanistan? Could you make that claim, or is it like it just depends where you're at? No.
It just depends. I mean, no, because like listen, going and doing anything in Afghanistan is not safe. You know, it's a matter of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. So the fact that people were willing to do that, and not just in Kabul, not just in the big cities, the fact that people really went out and tried to do this, even if 300 people turned out, that's still something important that people have to recognize. Because even leaving your house, you know, you're taking a risk on any given day. And so going out and voting at a time when the Taliban said specifically that they would target the election, no, it doesn't make it safe.
Right.
And were people like excited? What was the atmosphere like for these elections? Like, are people excited? And because I don't know how I don't even know how often this happens. Like, how often do these elections happen?
So technically, there should be a parliamentary election every 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But this election was actually delayed by 3.5 years because of security issues and because the government couldn't agree on electoral reform policies. And so this election was sort of rushed. They announced the election. Within 5 months, they announced the election and they held the election. And so what happens is the day that campaigning starts, so in this case it was September 28th.
Wait, so 5 months?
You wake up. No, it's the campaign period for the parliamentary election is only about 20 days. Yeah. But from the announcement of the date of the election to when the election took place, it's about 5 months. Wow. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that's such a. I'm just saying that's like such a short period of time.
Well, it's even shorter when you consider the campaign time. Yeah. Because the campaign period was only about 20 days. Wow. So what that means is on September 28th, when you woke up and you walked into any city in this country, and in the last week I've been to 4 different provinces. Everywhere you go, there are billboards, there are signs, there are posters of candidates. Actually, one of my friends, Habib Totakhil, he used to write for the Wall Street Journal. He said something really funny on that day. He's like, everywhere there's these overly photoshopped pictures of parliament candidates. And it's true, it really is. And you know, it's funny because it's like the cities are inundated. Like I was in Kabul, I was in Gardez, I was in Khost, the capital of Khost province, I was in Logar province. Everywhere there were, these banners and these signs, and it's like how many people actually know who these people are, and how it's so incredible to see that. You're just seeing random faces of men and women everywhere, trying to get your attention.
Right, got it. So talking about those overly photoshopped candidates, what are some of the names that we should be paying attention to?
In terms of the candidates?
Yes.
I don't know if there's
that stick out to you, maybe in terms of like their...
Well, I'll tell you some trends. So, like for one, there were a lot of young people running this time. A lot. I'm talking like so the cutoff age is 25. You have to be at least 25. So I met candidates who are 26 years old who are running.
Wow.
Right? 26, 28, 30, even 35, maybe pushing it a little for young, but still, there were so many young candidates voting, running. There were also a lot of former journalists, many that I know. At least 3 or 4 journalists running from different provinces that were, really, it was interesting to see them make that shift to go from journalism to wanting to be in politics. And, in many ways, they have a built-in audience. So that was a trend that we saw. There were a lot of women running, but there usually are. And then there were negative trends. There were like children of warlords running. There were big-time businessmen running or their children running. A friend of mine who works in the government, he was like, Ali, a lot of businessmen and their children are running because they want to protect their assets, especially against these sorts of measures that the government is taking against fraud and corruption. So that was another trend that we saw. We also saw, something fun like, new kinds of advertising. Like we saw everyone's Facebook was inundated with ads. Instagram was inundated with ads. One candidate I loved was that when he announced his bid for parliament, his wife retweeted him and said, "The love of my life is running." And then he responded by saying, "I have 2 great role models for me, my wife and my mother." Wow. And that tweet that his wife tweeted went pretty much viral in Afghanistan because it was so unprecedented in a lot of ways, and it was really sweet,
And Ghazal brought up a question on the Facebook about why do you think so many people are running? Like, why are so many young people running? You said this is like a trend.
I asked a lot of them, and they said that they wanted to. First of all, they were like, "We're the majority of the country now, right?" Depending on the figure, it's between like 40 and like 65% of the country, depending on what your cutoff for youth is young people. Also, now that a lot, like I said, like somewhere as young as 26, so they just reached the age where they could register as candidates, right?
Is there a certain age that you have to register?
25. You have to be at least 25.
Okay.
To run. So they said that basically the current parliament is not a representative of the people. They used phrases like a mafia network, full of corruption, only out for themselves, out to make money, trying to divide people through like racist words and things like that, or through divisive politics. So what all of them had in common was they all said, we want to keep our door open. We want people to be able to come to us even after we win, and we want to move away from the sort of like ethnicization of politics. We want to be the representative for everyone. So like one of the candidates was running from Kandahar, and he's like, I'm not only representing the people of Kandahar, I'm representing the people of Bamiyan and of Badakhshan and of Takhar and of Kabul and of Nigarar and all these. He's like, I don't just want to be seen. Obviously, I'm running I want to represent the people of Kandahar, but I also want to represent all of Afghanistan. And everyone I spoke to made this comment. They're like, we want to get away from linguistic and regional and ethnic politics. And they were all different ethnicities, all of them.
Okay, gotcha. Kind of going off of that, I know, speaking for myself, before I went to Afghanistan, I always kind of had this idea that corruption was in every facet of the government, of in politics, of in elections. And when I went there, it was really so really good people in Afghanistan that are trying their best and really are pushing to remove that corruption.
I think, look, like corruption is a complicated issue.
Right.
Because there's definitely corruption. I've seen it in my experiences.
Yeah.
I think one of the problems is that I think corruption starts from the top, right? And you have to hold the highest level leaders accountable for it first. Because if they're stealing money and they're stealing people's rights, obviously the policeman at the passport office, who isn't getting paid enough is going to take a bribe. As much as it makes you angry when you have to get a passport, obviously they're going to do that. Or when you need an ID or whatever it is you need to do. And you know, like you have to, in some ways, you know, you're like, okay, these people are just trying to make a living.
Yeah.
You know, again, we're looking at the lowest level. And I think the problem is it's always the lower levels that get punished. It's always the lower levels that get caught out in these kinds of things. Like, a few years ago, the president, Ashraf Ghani, said something like, we need the ulama to like issue a fatwa against corruption. And I was like, no, what do they have to do with? Like, they're just as much victims of it as anyone else. You need to clean up your own government. You know, the people around you, you need to hold them, including yourself and everyone around you, you need to hold them accountable. And you need to make the change that you want to see. Because once they realize that the highest up can't do it, then the policeman isn't going to do it. The guard isn't going to do it. You know, the person sitting in the office isn't going to do it.
Yeah, I hear ya. A question that just kind of came up for me right now is thinking about how corruption is kind of ingrained, and just like how you said, like it's not black and white, and a lot of folks are just trying to survive. What do you kind of see in terms of the willingness to remove that corruption, and almost like how likely is it? Like what are you feeling about that whole issue in Afghanistan, which is a super complicated question, but just kind of thoughts.
I think it's like I said earlier, it comes down to starting at the top. So we have very powerful people, including our first vice president, our current first vice president, our former second vice president, Ustad Sayyaf, who literally have been called out for not paying their electricity bill.
Wow.
These people are millionaires. And like right now, it's almost winter. Kabul will be without power for hours at a time in the winter. And these men who are millionaires, who built massive mansions, massive compounds, aren't doing their fair. They're getting all of the benefits of the government, but they're not doing something as simple as paying their electricity bill. So until someone can go up to Ustad Sayyaf and Paghman, or to Dostum, or to any of these other people and say, pay your bill, nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
And that thing is like, they can make, the average Afghan pay $100, $200, $300 for their electricity bill because they know they'll never get it out of these men. And the average person doesn't have a choice. They need power.
Yeah.
So,
I hope that...
now, can the parliament be effective in putting those people in check? One of my questions is like, how much power does the parliament actually have?
The parliament has a lot of power. It's very similar to the Congress in the U.S., right? It has a lot. They approve ministers, right? Mm-hmm. So they not only do they approve ministers, but they can call in a minister at any time and call for a vote of confidence. So at any time, if they're upset, if they feel like a minister isn't doing his or her job, they can vote them out. They can vote them in and they can vote them out. This is a major issue. So if you have an incompetent minister, look to the parliament, because at the end of the day, and this is what these young candidates were bringing up. Like this government, the National Unity Government, has a phenomenal turnaround rate in terms of ministerial positions. So again, this leads to questions both about how the central government is choosing people and how the legislature is responding to that. Because you've seen cases where people vote someone in and then they vote them out in a vote of confidence. They also can, they also approve laws. They vote on laws. So they have a lot of power. And at the same time, they are supposed to be the representative of the people to Kabul, right? To the government in Kabul. So if someone in Kandahar or someone in Bamiyan has an issue, they should technically be able to come to their parliamentarian in Kabul and say, my area doesn't have a bridge, or this guy beat me up and took my money and he's a thug. They should be the ones that answer these things and raise it to the government in Kabul.
Okay, gotcha. In terms of the U.S. military involvement, what does that kind of look like? How does that tie into the parliamentary elections?
It doesn't necessarily tie into the parliament. I mean, like for instance, if the parliament wants, they
Yeah.
can, they come out and question the bilateral security agreement with the United States, which was the agreement that was signed basically the day after the National Unity Government came into being in 2014, which allows for thousands of U.S. soldiers to stay in the country. And actually, one of the things about that is that they can't be prosecuted here, those soldiers. So if they commit any crime, they get prosecuted in the U.S.
Right.
And so there are a lot of people that are now, with the security situation getting worse, there's a lot of parliamentarians. Now, some of this is politically motivated, but there are a lot of parliamentarians that are asking questions about this. So in terms of like the U.S. military involvement, they can sort of get involved in it, but again, that's something that's much more high level. A lot of those discussions are made between Kabul and Washington directly.
Okay.
So is there anything, I guess, what are some other, before we move on maybe to some other things, is there anything else you feel like that we need to know about the elections in particular that you think is just really important to know for people who are outside of the country and outside of Afghanistan, kind of good or bad?
I mean, I think it's like an election anywhere else. Campaigning is very similar everywhere you go in the world. It requires a lot of money. It requires a lot of promises that you probably won't live up to be quite honest.
Sounds familiar.
Exactly. It requires a lot of trust by the people. And I think that's one of the for like people who didn't vote. That's one of the reasons they were like, look, why am I going to vote another corrupt person in? Why am I going to risk my life to make sure that's another thief, gets this powerful position? But again, despite all of that, 4 million people did turn out. So that's something to remember. That's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. I just kind of want to say, like, as you're speaking about that, and when we see these photos coming out of Afghanistan of people voting, it really takes my breath away. It's really incredible just to see how resilient folks can be, and how despite, I'm kind of thinking of like a lot of folks in America and how when we feel disparaged and we feel like our government is not being accountable, how easy it is for us not to vote. And we're not walking out and feeling like our bodies are at risk, right? It's safe here. And so I think about Afghanistan and it just really takes my breath away that like folks are so resilient and are going out and voting. And that's really beautiful to know as someone in diaspora for me, I think.
So when I went to go vote, there were a lot of policemen ahead of me in line. And I remember at first they were happy because they thought like the ink wasn't a thing this time. And then when we were waiting in line, no, I'll tell you why in a second. And then when we were waiting in line, they saw that people's fingers were being inked, and this policeman, he said in Pashto, he was like, from what I could understand, he said, when I get home, I have to wash my hand because I have to go to Kunduz after this, which is a province in the north, and the road leads to Kunduz. There's a lot of Taliban along the way, and the Taliban would stop you, and who knows what they would do to you if they saw that you had voted. So the fact that he was facing that risk, he still came out, and him and all the other policemen in that area came out, and not only did they register, but they also voted. So again, that's one of those things that it made me really happy,
Yeah.
Just all the problems.
Yeah.
I had a couple of questions come up for me, actually. Do you feel like, are the results of the elections accurate? Like, can people who vote trust that their vote is going to be counted fairly and properly?
So this is the other problem.
You forgot to tell us about this one.
Is that all of the last 3 major elections have been plagued by accusations of fraud and corruption, and I think they're warranted. I think the biggest issue with the result of this election is the fact that it's going on for 2 days is going to raise a lot of questions for people. Now, I've spoken to a lot of candidates who personally tell me they're upset but won't say it to the media, and I think that's because let's be honest, a lot of people are waiting to see what the result is. If it's in their favor, they'll keep quiet. If they find out that they were unsuccessful, you better believe they're going to be like, how was it that there was 2 days of voting? What happened overnight in those voting centers, right? They're going to use this to their advantage. So sadly, corruption is an issue. Fraud is an issue. That's something that the biometric devices were supposed to help bring down. But again, once the results come in, we'll see not only what the results say, but how people react to it.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so kind of moving on from talking about the elections, I know that you mentioned before about the recent loss of, I think he's a police chief in Kandahar, right? General. And so I know specifically, like, my parents have been talking about it a lot, and it was a really big deal. What is there kind of to know about these recent killings, and how does that impact just the atmosphere and kind of the feeling of still wanting to go out and vote, or just whatever your thoughts are about that?
So if we're going to talk about Rozik specifically, he was the police chief of Kandahar province starting in 2011, and he had worked his way up in the Kandahar police over the years. Now, what he's credited with is making the city of Kandahar safe. And it's true, anyone who's been there recently will tell you just how safe it is, how controlled it is, to the point where a lot of people have to keep their IDs with them at all times, because he wanted to make sure that Pakistanis didn't get in and pretend to be Afghan.
Wow.
So he was very, very, and then the other thing that a lot of people love about him is he was very vocally anti-Pakistan. He gave an interview for Vice News where he said, "As long as I live, Punjab will be my enemy." And
I got chills.
Right? And he did an interview for like a NATO video where he said, like, the war is not here. It's on the other side of the line. It's in Pakistan. He said this in a NATO video. So this is what really, and he was also very anti-Taliban. This is really what made people like him. The fact that he was able to secure the city, the fact that he was so vehemently anti-Pakistan, the fact that he was anti-Talib, but he also had a dark side. He was accused of disappearances of people, of torture, of killings of people, and a lot of it was the excuse of, let's pretend he doesn't like my friend. What he would say is like, that's a Talib, that's why I killed him. So this anti-Talib rhetoric went both ways. So he was one of those people. He was a very complicated figure, but very much a result of the war on terror, the so-called war on terror, because the U.S. and Canada, who were both in Kandahar, loved him because he brought order to the city. But I can tell you, as much as people loved him, every person I knew in Kandahar was scared of this man. I remember years ago I was doing like investigative journalism training for reporters from different provinces, and one of them from Kandahar said, "How do we do investigations on people that could get us killed?"
Right.
I said, you know what? You have to realize what's important enough and what isn't. And unfortunately, sometimes in this country, you do have to self-censor to keep yourself alive.
Yeah.
And he was definitely a figure like that. So he had a very positive, very bright side, and he also had a very negative, dark side. So it's a very complicated legacy.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's interesting.
The fact that he was killed in Kandahar, the governor's office, while meeting with the top U.S. general in Afghanistan, that scared a lot of people for two reasons. One, if Rozik could get killed in Kandahar, then anyone could get killed anywhere, right? 2 days before the election. And, And, like, for me personally, I have mixed feelings about the man. But for me personally, what ran through my mind is what's going to happen to Kandahar.
Right.
What's going to happen to the security and stability that's been there for the last 7 years? Can whoever comes in his place, reestablish that for good or bad? That's more than anything. For a lot of people, it's a very emotional loss because to them, he was a hero. For me, more than that, it was about what's going to happen to the people of Kandor and what's going to happen to that place. Because it's a great problem, if you've ever been, it's a great place.
Right. And I know as a diaspora Afghan and Omar, I wonder if you feel the same. I know, like, we kind of heard like Kandor is like wild, wild west. Like you don't go to Kandor. Like that's what we've heard as diaspora folks. So to hear that General Razik brought that much security, but also was not again this black and white figure. Like there's so many grays. It also just kind of makes me think like it's so interesting because I just kind of want to go off what we have structured here. It's interesting to me, like whenever as a diaspora Afghan, whenever I talk to folks who are not Afghan, they almost place this expectation that everything is going to be black and white, and they hold these people they want to hold these people accountable in that way. And these are folks who are not Afghan. And I think about our own American government, right? And how here nothing is black and white either. And for us to have that expectation from a country that has been in 40 years of war, it's so refreshing and so nice to hear a lot of positive things coming from you, someone who's there on the ground, because it's kind of like there's a lot of resilience and it's going to take a long time. And for us to have all these expectations, I think as diaspora Afghans and as non-Afghans, we need to be patient. And that's just kind of what's going through my mind right now.
It goes back to what I said in the beginning. It took the United States more than 200 years to elect a reality star as their president.
Right.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah, no, I know. I know you are.
So if it took them that long to get to that point, how long for us with, we're stuck between probably two of the worst neighbors on earth.
Right.
Iran, Pakistan, and then Russia not far, China not far, and then the EU and the US's own vision for this country. The fact that things are moving, that has to be taken into account. And this is something that the government has repeatedly been saying, is that this is an imposed war. This is not a civil war. This is not a war that we chose or we brought on. It's an imposed war. And so it's gonna have its complications. And part of these look, like someone like Razik, if you weren't a fan of his human rights record, well, you know who bolstered him? The Canadians and the US and NATO. Just like we did with so many other police chiefs and warlords and commanders and militias throughout the country. So again, these are issues that have roots in many different directions.
Right.
Ali, you referred me to a TRT article from Turkey on the general and how strong men breed strong resistance. So like when we kind of prop these individuals up, the resistance grows, the backlash gets stronger. So that was something that was really eye-opening for me to kind of also just like realize that, and I think you brought up the really great points about how these individuals are supported by the U.S. government, but it is complicated. Like there's no black and white to this.
Mm-hmm. But that's exactly what we have to keep in mind, is that none of this exists in a vacuum, and these people don't become that powerful without outside support, without internal support and outside support. So when we're looking at how people got to be this level, to this level, we have to look at it in a global context.
Yeah.
Something you've been reporting on is when we talk about the military and the war, you've talked about how Eric Prince, right? He's an American dude. He's coming into Afghanistan and trying to privatize the military. Like, if you could just quickly talk about that.
So basically, he's claiming that he can bring down the cost of the war by this massive, I don't remember the exact percentage, but by this massive percentage, by essentially doing what he did in Iraq and which obviously was a massive failure in Afghanistan. And the crazy thing, the thing that set people off was that he came to Kabul. He appeared on the largest private broadcaster in the country and essentially said that within 6 months he could change the face of this war. And just like we were talking about Razik and these militias around the country, the problem with trying to privatize, forget the problem of trying to privatize a war in general. Trying to privatize a war here is that how are you going to make sure you aren't enabling these same sorts of people who will commit, because this is the thing with these kinds of abuses, because with a company like what Eric Prince is proposing, they aren't accountable to the same degree as the US military would be. And they definitely aren't accountable to the same degree that the Afghan military would be. So how are they really going to act? And how is it that 40 nations, including NATO, could not figure out this war, but this man whose business is war, who makes money off of war, on a personal level, obviously countries make money, including the United States, make money off of wars, but he's a private business. He gets a lot of leeway legally. How is it that he can claim to try and solve this war? And what scared people was that he was meeting with powerful figures here and really trying to sell them on privatizing the war. The fact that he was actually campaigning for it and coming here and appearing on the largest television network in the country, the second time in 1 year, that worried a lot of people. And eventually he was made persona non grata here.
Right. Talking about the war and talking about the imposed war, how are people reacting to it, reacting to the anniversary of the war? Or is it being discussed?
It just passed, right? A few,
a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
It's something that if people get asked about it, and sometimes people talk about what it was like when this war, the 2001 invasion, had started. But it's not. I think a lot of people remembered it when, they were being asked by I remembered it when I was being asked by Western media outlets. And a lot of other people remembered it that way. It's not necessarily something people mark on their calendars.
Right.
So I think more than anything, what it is this feeling of, things aren't getting better. In fact, they're probably getting worse. And this feeling of, like, people our age, right? So like I said, I was like 3 or 4 years old when I left. And I remember the first time my mother came back was in 2013. And I wrote a story about it. And I remember the last thing she said to me before she left, she was like, Ali, you were born in this country in war, you left it in war, you came back in war, and you'll probably leave it again in war. And that's true of me, of you, of Omar, and of probably everyone else watching this right now. And of all of these young kids who are running for parliament, right? Like if you're 26 years old, that means you were born during the Civil War.
Yeah.
If you're 30, that's probably about the Soviet occupation time. And so that's a massive issue. That, like, even as part of the diaspora, I think maybe Omar can back me up on this, but I used to joke, like, our childhood stories were about our grandfather being tortured in Polocharki.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Aunts used to, like, regale us with these, like, horrific stories about what it was like. My sister, she was, like 16, 17 when we left, and she said, I don't remember. She's like, our parents always talk about the good old days, but I don't remember a good day from there.
Yeah.
Because she essentially grew up with the Soviet occupation,
mm-hmm.
And the start of communism, and then being a refugee in Peshawar, then going to Pakistan, and whatever came with that, and then coming to the U.S. and being told you stink and you look different and this and that, jumping into high school in the U.S. when you've just come out of a country at war and you're facing all that racism.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you remember everything that happened to get you there.
Yeah.
And I think that this is true of the majority of, no matter where we are in the world, this is true of Afghanistan, like we're all affected by this war. As much as we want to pretend like we're not, we're all affected by these last 40 years, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a quote somewhere, and I'm forgetting who. It was an American author who wrote it, and they said something about like when you go to Afghanistan, every everything has a story of war. Even a loaf of bread that you pick up has a story of war. And so, just as you were speaking, like, I think that also brought me back to why we should be caring about these elections as diaspora Afghan. Even though we're not in the country, war is pretty much ingrained in the history of our families and how we got here.
You're paying for this war. Remember that.
Right.
Pay taxes in the United States, maybe. So if you pay taxes in the United States, you're paying for this war.
Yeah.
And the truth is that the average person in the United States doesn't even remember that this war is going on.
Yeah.
Because why? Because like what was the initial discussion I had with Omar about this series was that it was about what you didn't hear in the news, right? And so, like for me, these last 2 days, I was shocked that CNN and well, I guess I shouldn't name them, but that's okay. That the international
shade
that these international outlets were calling me about a parliamentary election, and the fact that they called me on the second day. So when I was in California for Omar's wedding in August, at that time, the province of Ghazni essentially fell to the Taliban for several days. There was a bombing in the west of Kabul on basically like the equivalent of an SAT prep center, the center for the college entrance exam, that killed dozens of people, young students. Do you know what was on the news in the U.S.? The Omarosa tapes. Right? Because like U.S. media loves panel shows. Every panel was like different frames of different people, and they were all discussing Omarosa. One, this hour, next hour. It was just different people talking about the same, another reality star turned politician. And so this is why it's so important to know, because there are people dying. And I won't name the media outlet this time. There was when Rozek died, there was a media outlet, they put out a video, and they said because the top U.S. commander was with him, like, oh, the top U.S. commander narrowly escaped an assassination plot, and 2 people who were near him got killed, and they're the types of people who would be near him, but he was so brave because he was in that room and he didn't get killed. And then, because it's the U.S. media, and oh, by the way, Donald Trump hasn't gone to a war zone yet. There was no mention of Rozek's name. Not only is it that, he's a person and his name should be mentioned, but in terms of politics and security in Afghanistan, he wasn't just any person.
Right.
He was one of the most influential, important, loved and hated figures in this country. Yeah. And for him to be killed really did shock people. It shocked me.
And I mean, we're talking about like the war, and I think one of the questions that always comes up especially for those in diaspora is like, what do people in Afghanistan think? And like a lot of your role is to collect that information, but you put like, you put 10 Afghans in a room and you get 30 different opinions, and like, how do you gauge that, or how do you like get those stories of what people are actually thinking in Afghanistan in your role? How do you get to that? How do you speak for those voices?
I don't know if I speak for those voices. I think everyone has their own voice. I hope, if anything, I just amplify those voices and I bring it out to an international audience. I don't know I don't think I do anything special or different. One thing I do try and do is I really don't like talking to politicians or interviewing politicians, because we know what a politician will say, right? That's not special, that's not unique. I can tell you with my eyes closed what they would say. I would rather talk to the guy who drives the rickshaw in Jalalabad, right? Or the guy who makes the glass in Herat, or the woman who's going to university in Paktia, or the man who's a doctor in Bamyan. That's what I would rather hear from, because they're the ones that are actually, I mean, I don't mean this to sound trite and like, oh, precious, but I mean, because I really, so going back to the election, like one thing that kept people from voting was that the way that the registration works now is, so the national ID, should have put it out, it's basically like a piece of paper, like a piece of office paper, and, you know, it has the writing and the picture, whatever. And then on the back, what they've done is they've put the registration sticker on the back. And why that's important to remember is that most people in Afghanistan, the only document they travel with is their tazkira, their national ID.
Right.
So to get to a lot of places, you pass through potential Taliban territory. If the Taliban were to see you with a voter registration sticker on the back of your tazkira, you don't know what would happen to you, right? And I remember when I went to register, I asked one of the guys working at the registration center, I'm like, don't people realize how dangerous this is? And he said, Ali, the people who are making, or he didn't say my name, but whatever, the people who are making this decision don't go by road, they go by airplane. How do they know what it would be like?
Yeah.
And and this is a point that I want to make clear, is that it's not just going to Wardak or any other province, it's going to the districts of Kabul. There are districts in Kabul where if you're caught with that tazkira 40 minutes outside the city, 30 minutes outside the city, if you're caught, you could be at risk. So again, this is why I say it's so, you know, because these political types will try and sell this a million different ways. And I get why they did it for in terms of like security and fraud and corruption. But think about the average person that has to go to Wardak, that has to go to Bamyan and pass through Wardak or Parwan. The average person that has to drive to Kandahar, that can't afford a $150 ticket, you know? So again, this is sort of what I hope I can get across.
Right. This was a question that I kind of thought about this morning. As diaspora Afghans, is there anything that we can do? I mean, I know. Right. Okay.
You know, keep up with the news. Talk to people here. Come see what it's like. You may like it, you may hate it.
Right.
But you tried. You know, I don't think you're obligated to like being here. Right. A lot of people don't. It's fine. It's not for everybody. But some people really do like it. I mean, I think that's all. And if you are informed, and if you have come here, then maybe you can be one of those people that influences things. Like when I lived in DC, there were so many events I would go to in Afghanistan where there was literally not one Afghan on the panel. Not one. You know, or, you know, how many times do we see, you know, an old white man and an old white woman sitting in DC or New York talking about what's going on in Afghanistan, and no one asked them when was the last time they were in this country. So if we become informed and we become more involved, we don't need that old white man or that old white woman. Omar and Madina can go.
Yeah.
Ali, I have a. So you're saying it's important to get informed, and like, what do you think we need to do with that information though? What needs to happen?
I mean, I don't know. I think if you can look like I think like what you guys are doing is really great, right? Because you're engaging young Afghans who are involved in all aspects of society, right? Who have influence in so many different places, who have financial resources, who have networks. So hopefully, maybe some kind of a group can be created where people can lobby and can try and what's it called and like really present the issue, because I think people here can only do so much, and now as people who benefit from the good and the bad of this country, I think we have an obligation to try and do what we can in a positive way, again, without sounding like precious or trite or whatever. but in an informed way.
Ali, I know your battery is about to die, and so you have to run out. I just want to quickly ask, like, what are one or two, a few things that just make you hopeful about Afghanistan and about the future of Afghanistan? Like, just give me a few things for you that stand out as like, these are the things that really inspire me and make me hopeful about what's going to happen in the future.
I mean, I've met a lot of like really great people throughout this country. People who don't have electricity in their house, who keep a car battery to keep a single light bulb on, but will feed you the palau in their house in the mountains of Samangan. Or like where I was walking through like the snow-covered hills in Pine Shade, and they could see that we were getting tired, and they came and they brought us water. Or like the little boys in Darulta who were trying to teach me cricket, and I failed miserably. And the fact that I saw so many of these really cool young people that I admire saying that they want to run for parliament because they feel like it's a corrupt. They were willing to say that it's a corrupt system. They weren't towing the line. The fact that 4 million people, despite all of this, did come out and vote. The fact that there is an innovation here, that there are new ideas, that there's so much business and so much enterprise. I think these things, if they're really honed in on and harnessed, should make you hopeful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time out and sharing all of this with us. On a personal level, it touched me very deeply. There's so many times where I wanted to cry, and right now I'm totally getting teary-eyed. And that's because, and I'll tell you why, that's because before this conversation, all I knew about the elections is that I had some family members running. That was all I knew. And I thought it was cool. But now I think I really learned a lot about why this is important for us as diaspora Afghans. And it's making me want to feel accountable in terms of me going out to vote. Our voting, our elections are coming up, and a lot of us choose not to vote. And I'm starting to feel like, a little crappy that I was thinking about not voting just because I felt annoyed. But to know that the folks back home are doing that despite, everything that's happening, that's really, it's touching me on a deep level. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. Appreciate the insight and everything you brought. And, Medina, I think, said it all in terms of just like how impactful it is. And again, like that, the fact that it really honed in on like how much of an act that is, of like just that action of voting and like what that represents. Like it represents so much for people to just engage and participate in that. So like it's just like it makes me, even like when I read the stories and see the photographs, it makes me even more, just impressed and just admiring the people there and the country there. So I appreciate you kind of sharing us those insights, and hopefully we'll get a chance to chat more. And thank you for everyone that's joined us on Facebook Live, and please feel free to continue engaging in those comments. And continue to share. And Ali, hopefully you can make yourself available for people who have questions on there as well. But thank you all for joining the Samovar Network.
Now?
What's that?
Am I allowed to answer them now?
Yeah, go for it. You can answer them. Yeah. And then, but yeah, thank you again for joining us. Please catch our podcast on iTunes, catch our videos on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, Instagram. You'll find us all those places. So we'll transfer this over to a podcast soon. But thank you all again for joining, and thank you, Ali, for taking the time for us.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Good night, everyone. Peace.
Office.